I walked into my kitchen that Tuesday morning, expecting to grab coffee and head to work, but instead found a handwritten note on my counter that shattered my world in 88 words. Wade, the wedding is off. We've discovered Sarah's true intentions. Expect a call from my lawyer regarding the funds. This is final. Dad. My hands shook as I read it twice, then 3 times. $50,000. Gone. The money for our venue, catering, flowers, honeymoon. Money already spent, already promised to vendors who expected payment in 72 hours. Sarah's family flying in from Oregon tomorrow. But instead of panicking, I picked up my phone and made one calculated call that would change everything. 6 months earlier, my life had seemed perfect. I had just gotten engaged to Sarah Mitchell, a kindergarten teacher I met at a coffee shop downtown. She was everything I had never known I wanted. Genuine, kind, with this infectious laugh that made even my most stressful days bearable. When I introduced her to my parents, Robert and Patricia Morrison, they seemed genuinely charmed by her. My father, a successful tech entrepreneur who built his software company from nothing, actually smiled during dinner. My mother, who typically scrutinized every woman I dated, complimented Sarah's dress and asked about her teaching career with what seemed like real interest. That night, after Sarah left, my parents pulled me aside in their pristine living room overlooking the hills of Marin County. My father, still wearing his expensive suit from a board meeting, sat forward in his leather chair with an expression I had rarely seen. Pride mixed with something else. Relief, maybe. Wade, we like her, my mother said, adjusting her pearl necklace. She seems different from the others. My father nodded. Authentic. Not trying to impress us with designer clothes or name-dropping connections. When I told them Sarah and I were thinking about a simple courthouse wedding to save money, they exchanged one of those married couple glances that communicate entire conversations. My father cleared his throat. Son, you only get married once, hopefully. Let us handle the wedding costs. You two focus on planning something beautiful. I was stunned. My parents had always been generous but practical about money. They taught me the value of earning things myself, rarely offering handouts even when I struggled in college. Are you sure? Weddings can be expensive, and Sarah and I don't need anything elaborate. My mother laughed, the sound echoing off their vaulted ceilings. Wade, honey, we've been successful so you could have moments like this. Let us give you and Sarah the wedding you deserve. That conversation led to 6 months of magical planning. Sarah and I chose a vineyard in Napa Valley, a place we had visited on our 3rd date. The venue could accommodate 150 guests under ancient oak trees, with rolling hills as our backdrop. Sarah insisted on paying for her own dress, but my parents covered everything else. The band, the photographer, the elaborate dinner menu Sarah and I spent weeks perfecting. Sarah threw herself into planning with the enthusiasm of someone who had dreamed about her wedding since childhood. She made centerpieces by hand, spent hours researching photographers, and even learned calligraphy to address our invitations. Every evening, she would show me new ideas, her eyes bright with excitement, as she described how beautiful our day would be. I want our guests to feel the love, she would say, spreading vendor brochures across my kitchen table. Not impressed by how much we spent, but moved by how much we care about each other and them. My parents seemed delighted by her attention to detail. My mother even offered to help with flower arrangements, something she had never done for any family event. My father, typically reserved about emotional displays, told me privately that Sarah reminded him of my mother when they first met. She has that same light, he said. That optimism that makes you want to be better than you are. The months flew by in a blur of venue visits, cake tastings, and guest list revisions. Sarah's family in Oregon was thrilled. Her parents, both retired teachers, planned to arrive 2 days before the ceremony. Her sister was flying in from Boston to be maid of honor. My college friends had already booked hotels and arranged time off work. Everything was perfect. Too perfect, apparently. Now, staring at my father's note, I felt like I was trapped in some alternate reality. The accusations made no sense. Sarah researching my family's wealth? Contacting my ex-girlfriend Jessica? I had been with Sarah constantly over the past 6 months. When would she have had time for such elaborate deceptions? More importantly, why would she need to research information she could easily ask me directly? I called my father immediately, my hands still shaking from adrenaline and disbelief. Dad, what is this note about? What do you mean Sarah's true intentions? His voice was cold, businesslike. Wade, we hired a private investigator after noticing some concerning behavior patterns. Sarah has been researching our family's financial status online, taking screenshots of articles about our company's valuation. She even contacted your ex-girlfriend Jessica, asking specific questions about your inheritance prospects. My stomach dropped. That's impossible. Sarah doesn't even use social media that much, and she's never mentioned Jessica. Dad, this has to be a mistake. The evidence is conclusive, son. We have screenshots, search histories, phone records. I'm emailing you the investigator's report right now. Your mother and I refuse to fund a wedding to someone who is clearly manipulating you for financial gain. The call ended before I could respond. Within minutes, my email chimed with a message from my father, containing a 40-page PDF, titled, Investigation Report, Sarah Mitchell. I opened it with trembling fingers, scanning through pages of screenshots, financial records, and detailed observations of Sarah's alleged activities. But as I read, something felt wrong. The timeline didn't match my memories. The evidence seemed too convenient, too perfectly incriminating, and that's when I realized this nightmare was just beginning. I called Sarah immediately, my heart pounding as I waited for her to answer. When she picked up, I could hear the smile in her voice. Good morning, handsome. Ready for another exciting day of wedding planning? Sarah, we need to talk. Something's happened. The change in my tone killed her cheerful mood instantly. Wade, what's wrong? You sound terrible. I explained everything. My parents' note, the private investigator, the accusations about her researching my family's wealth, and contacting Jessica. With each detail, I heard Sarah's breathing become more shallow, more panicked. Wade, I swear on my mother's life, I have never Googled your family's business. I don't even know what your parents' company is called exactly. I've never contacted any of your ex-girlfriends. I wouldn't even know how to reach Jessica. Her voice broke on the last sentence, and I could hear her starting to cry. The raw pain in her response convinced me more than any logical argument could have. This was not the voice of someone caught in a lie. This was the voice of someone being falsely accused of something unthinkable. I believe you, I said immediately. Sarah, I know you. This doesn't make sense. Then why would your parents think this? Why would someone make up these things about me? I had been wondering the same thing. I'm going to demand to see this investigator's report. There has to be an explanation. After hanging up with Sarah, I called my father back and insisted on seeing the full evidence. He grudgingly agreed to email me the complete report, warning me that it would be difficult to read but necessary for me to understand Sarah's deception. The report arrived within an hour, and I immediately began examining it with the critical eye my engineering degree had trained me to use. What I found made my blood run cold, but not for the reasons my parents expected. The screenshots allegedly from Sarah's phone showed text conversations and internet searches, but the timestamps were wrong. One screenshot claimed Sarah had searched for Wade Morrison family net worth on a Tuesday evening at 9:15. I distinctly remembered that Tuesday because Sarah and I had been at a movie theater watching the latest Marvel film. I still had the ticket stubs in my wallet and the credit card receipt showing our purchase of popcorn and drinks at exactly 9:12. Another screenshot showed Sarah allegedly texting my ex-girlfriend Jessica, asking about my financial prospects and family money. But the phone number listed in the screenshot wasn't Jessica's current number. I knew this because Jessica had changed her number 6 months ago after getting harassed by her ex-boyfriend, and she had texted me the new number from my emergency contact list. The more I studied the report, the more inconsistencies I found. Sarah's supposed internet search history included terms like Morrison Family Trust and tech company inheritance laws. But the browser cache data showed searches happening on days when I knew Sarah was at school teaching her kindergarten class. I had picked her up from work several of those days and knew she didn't have access to a computer during school hours. Most damning of all, one screenshot claimed Sarah had researched how to inherit money after marriage, but the timestamp showed the search happening last Sunday afternoon. I remembered that Sunday perfectly because Sarah and I had spent the entire day hiking in Point Reyes, completely disconnected from phones and internet. We had taken dozens of photos together on the trail, all time-stamped hours before Sarah had supposedly been home researching inheritance laws. Armed with this evidence of fabrication, I called my father back. "Dad, this report is full of errors. The timestamps don't match Sarah's actual activities. Look at this screenshot from last Tuesday night. Sarah was with me at the movies. I have proof." My father's voice remained cold. "Wade, you're being manipulated. Sarah has obviously convinced you to help her create fake alibis. We're not changing our minds. The wedding funding is being withdrawn immediately. Then you're making a terrible mistake, and I'm not going to let you destroy my life based on lies. If you proceed with this wedding using our money, we'll take legal action to recover the funds. The money was conditional on our approval of your choice in spouse." That's when I made my calculated move. I had done my research during my lunch break, calling a lawyer friend about the legalities of conditional gifts. What my parents didn't know was that their attempt to control me was about to backfire spectacularly. "Dad, since you're threatening legal action, I'm filing a formal dispute on those funds with your business account. As of right now, that money is legally frozen pending investigation of fraudulent evidence." The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. "You can't do that," my father finally said, but I could hear uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Actually, I can. The money was gifted for a specific purpose. Deposits have already been made to vendors based on that gift, and now you're trying to withdraw it based on what I can prove is fabricated evidence. Any competent lawyer would advise me to freeze the account to prevent further financial damage while the truth is established." I hung up before he could respond, and immediately called my family's business bank. Within 20 minutes, I had filed a formal dispute on the wedding funds, citing suspected fraud in the decision to withdraw the gift. The account was immediately frozen pending investigation. My phone started ringing within an hour. First my mother, then my father, then both of them on a conference call. They were furious, threatening lawsuits and disownment, but I could hear something else in their voices that gave me hope. For the first time in this nightmare, they sounded uncertain. They were no longer in complete control of the situation. I spent the rest of that day documenting every inconsistency in the private investigator's report, creating a timeline of Sarah's actual activities that contradicted the fabricated evidence. I was building a case, preparing for war with my own family to save my wedding and protect the woman I loved. But I was about to discover that this battle was more personal and more devastating than I could have imagined. The enemy wasn't some anonymous private investigator making mistakes. The enemy was much closer to home. The next morning brought chaos. My parents were frantically calling the bank, trying to unfreeze the account. But the dispute process had been initiated and would take days to resolve. Every vendor for our wedding was now potentially at risk of not being paid, which meant I had to spend my day calling florists, caterers, and photographers to explain the situation without revealing the family drama behind it. Sarah met me for coffee that afternoon, her eyes red from crying. She had spent the night researching the private investigator named in the report, trying to understand how someone could fabricate such detailed lies about her life. "I found his website," she said, sliding her laptop across the table. "He specializes in corporate investigations and divorce cases. Wade, why would your parents hire someone like this to investigate me? What could possibly make them think I'm some kind of criminal?" I had been wondering the same thing. My parents had seemed genuinely fond of Sarah for months. Their sudden hostility felt inexplicable, like they had been replaced by completely different people overnight. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Something about this whole situation feels orchestrated." That's when my phone buzzed with a text from my younger brother Marcus. Throughout this entire crisis, Marcus had been unusually quiet. Normally, he would have been calling constantly, offering advice, picking sides, inserting himself into the drama. Marcus had never been able to resist family conflict. His silence struck me as odd, but I had been too focused on saving my wedding to think about it deeply. His text was brief. Heard about the wedding situation. Sorry, man. Want to grab a beer and talk? I agreed to meet him after work. Marcus and I had always been close despite our 3-year age difference. He worked at our parents' company as a marketing director, living in a trendy apartment in San Francisco, and dating a rotating series of women he never seemed serious about. I had always assumed he would eventually settle down, but at 26, he seemed content with his bachelor lifestyle. We met at our usual bar in downtown, a sports pub where we had been coming since Marcus turned 21. He was already nursing a beer when I arrived, his expression more serious than I had ever seen it. This whole thing with Mom and Dad is crazy, he said as I sat down. I can't believe they hired a private investigator to spy on Sarah. You knew about the investigator? Marcus looked uncomfortable. Dad mentioned they had concerns about Sarah's motives. I thought he meant they were just being overprotective. I didn't know they were actually investigating her until the report came out. Something in his tone bothered me. Marcus was usually more direct, more opinionated. This careful neutrality felt rehearsed. Marcus, what do you think about these accusations? Do you believe Sarah is some kind of gold digger? He took a long drink before answering. I don't know, Wade. I mean, you've been pretty generous with her. Nice dinners, expensive weekend trips. Maybe she got comfortable with that lifestyle. I stared at my brother in disbelief. Sarah insists on splitting restaurant bills. She bought her own engagement ring because she didn't want me spending money I couldn't afford. She's been working overtime at the school to save money for our honeymoon. Marcus, you've met her dozens of times. Does she seem like someone who cares about money? Marcus shrugged, avoiding eye contact. People can be good at hiding their true motivations. The conversation continued for another hour, but Marcus remained strangely non-committal about everything. He expressed sympathy for my situation, while subtly suggesting that maybe our parents had valid concerns. It felt like he was reading from a script, hitting predetermined talking points rather than speaking from the heart. I left the bar feeling more confused than ever. My brother's reaction didn't make sense. Marcus had always been Sarah's champion in our family, praising her kindness and humor at every family gathering. This sudden ambiguity felt completely out of character. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something was nagging at me about the private investigator's report, something beyond the timeline inconsistencies I had already discovered. I got up at 2 a.m. and reopened the file on my laptop, studying every page with obsessive attention to detail. That's when I noticed something that made my blood freeze. The metadata on the screenshots. Every digital file contains hidden information about when and where it was created, and I had a friend named Tyler who worked in digital forensics for a cybersecurity company. If anyone could analyze these files properly, it was him. I emailed Tyler the entire report at 3 a.m, asking if he could examine the digital evidence for authenticity. He was an early riser who hit the gym before work, so I knew he would see my message soon. Tyler called me at 6:30, and I could hear excitement in his voice. Wade, this is some seriously sloppy work. Whoever created these screenshots did a terrible job covering their tracks. The metadata shows these images were created on a work computer registered to Morrison Tech Solutions. They're not screenshots from Sarah's phone at all. They're fabrications created on a computer at your family's company. My world tilted sideways. Are you sure? Completely sure. I can tell you exactly which computer created these files, what time they were made, and even what software was used. Whoever did this used basic photo editing software to create fake text conversations and browser histories. It's actually pretty amateur work. I felt sick. Tyler, can you tell me which specific computer at my family's company was used? Give me an hour to dig deeper into the metadata. I'll call you back. That hour felt like a lifetime. I paced my apartment, trying to process the implications. Someone at my family's company had fabricated evidence against Sarah. Someone with access to their computer systems had deliberately sabotaged my wedding and my relationship with my parents. When Tyler called back, his voice was grim. "Wade, the computer used to create these files is registered to Marcus Morrison. Your brother created every piece of evidence in this report." The phone slipped from my hands. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the wall, as the truth crashed over me like a wave. My own brother had orchestrated this entire nightmare. Marcus had hired the private investigator not to investigate Sarah, but to provide cover for fabricated evidence he created himself. But why? What could Marcus possibly gain from destroying my wedding and turning our parents against the woman I loved? I was about to find out, and the answer would be more devastating than I could have imagined. I called Marcus immediately, my hands shaking with rage and disbelief. When he answered, his voice was groggy with sleep. "Wade, it's 7 in the morning. What's wrong? We need to talk. Now. My apartment. 20 minutes. Something in my tone must have warned him, because his voice became instantly alert. "What's this about?" "You know exactly what it's about." The line went quiet for several seconds. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had changed completely. Gone was the concerned brother from the night before. In its place was someone I barely recognized. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. When Marcus arrived at my apartment, he looked like he hadn't slept. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and his clothes looked hastily thrown on. He tried to maintain his innocent expression, but I could see guilt written all over his face. "Marcus, I know you created the evidence against Sarah. I have a digital forensics expert who traced everything back to your computer at work. I know you hired the private investigator and fed him fabricated screenshots. What I don't understand is why." Marcus stood in my living room for a long moment, his face cycling through denial, anger, and finally resignation. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You weren't supposed to figure it out." The confession hit me like a physical blow. Even though I knew the truth, hearing him admit it made it real, in a way that was almost unbearable. "Why, Marcus? Why would you destroy my life like this?" Marcus collapsed onto my couch, putting his head in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were filled with tears, but also something darker. Resentment. "Because you were leaving." "What are you talking about?" "The business, Wade. You were going to leave the family business after you got married. I could see it happening. Sarah was making you soft, making you think about other priorities besides work. You started talking about maybe moving to Oregon to be closer to her family. You mentioned wanting kids, wanting to scale back your responsibilities so you could be present as a father." I stared at my brother in complete bewilderment. "Marcus, that's called having a life. That's called growing up and building a family." "Not for us." Marcus stood up abruptly, his voice rising. "Wade, we're business partners. We built that company together with Dad. I depend on you being there, focused on work, committed to growing what we've created. If you get married and start having kids, everything changes." The selfishness of his reasoning was staggering. "So you decided to sabotage my wedding to keep me single and focused on work." Marcus began pacing my living room, his words tumbling out faster as the dam of secrecy finally broke. "I thought if Mom and Dad saw evidence that Sarah was just using you for money, they would talk sense into you. You've always listened to them. I figured you would break up with Sarah, stay focused on the business, and eventually thank me for saving you from making a huge mistake." "A huge mistake? Marcus, I love her." "You think you love her?" Marcus spun around to face me, his face flushed with anger and desperation. "But love makes people stupid, Wade. Look at Dad. He married Mom, and immediately became less aggressive in business. Look at our Uncle David. He got married, had kids, and now he's stuck in some middle management job instead of building something significant. Marriage ruins ambition." I felt like I was looking at a stranger. This bitter, calculating person couldn't be the brother I had grown up with. "Marcus, you're talking about our parents' marriage like it's a failure. They've been happy for 30 years. They built a successful business together while raising 2 kids. And Uncle David chose to prioritize his family because that's what made him happy. There's nothing wrong with that. Marcus shook his head violently. You don't understand. Without you fully committed to the business, I can't achieve what I want to achieve. We're a team, Wade. We've always been a team. We're brothers, not business slaves. I can be committed to the company and still have a wife. No, you can't. I've seen it happen too many times. Marriage changes everything. Wives have opinions about work schedules, about business decisions, about how much time their husbands spend at the office. Sarah would slowly convince you to prioritize her over the business, and eventually you'd want to leave altogether. The twisted logic of his reasoning was becoming clear. Marcus hadn't just sabotaged my wedding. He had been planning this for months, probably since the day I announced my engagement. How long have you been planning this, Marcus? His expression became sheepish. I started researching private investigators about a month after you proposed to Sarah. I wanted to be ready in case you got too serious about marriage. A month after I proposed? Marcus, we've been engaged for 8 months. You've been lying to my face for 7 months? I kept hoping you would come to your senses on your own. But when you started talking about the wedding venue and the honeymoon, I realized you were really going through with it. I had to act. The magnitude of his betrayal was overwhelming. My own brother had spent months plotting to destroy my happiness, manipulating our parents, and lying to my face while pretending to support my relationship. But then Marcus said something that made me realize this nightmare was far from over. Wade, I know you're angry. But think about this logically. Sarah doesn't know I created the evidence. Your parents don't know either. We can make this all go away. I'll tell the private investigator there was a mistake in his report. We'll say there was a technical error that corrupted the files. Your parents will restore the wedding funding, you'll get married, and everything goes back to normal. I looked at my brother in complete disbelief. Marcus, you fabricated evidence to convince our parents that the woman I love is a gold digger. You nearly destroyed my relationship with them and traumatized Sarah. And you think we can just pretend it never happened? I'm trying to fix this, Wade. I realize I made a mistake. A mistake? Marcus, this wasn't a mistake. This was a calculated, months-long deception designed to manipulate our entire family. This is sociopathic behavior. Marcus's expression hardened. Don't be dramatic. I was protecting our business interests. No, you were protecting your own selfish interests. And Marcus, there's something you should know. I froze the business account when Dad threatened legal action. As of yesterday, your salary payments are also frozen. For the first time in our conversation, Marcus looked genuinely frightened. You can't do that. I already did. And Marcus, I'm not unfreezing anything until you confess everything to our parents and Sarah. You're going to admit what you did, apologize, and face the consequences of your actions. Marcus's face went white. Wade, if I tell them what I did, they'll fire me. Dad will kick me out of the company. I'll lose everything. You should have thought about that before you decided to destroy my life. My brother stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him calculating his options. What he said next revealed just how deep his deception had gone. Wade, there's something else you need to know. The embezzled money I've been taking from the company. If you get me fired, Dad will discover the missing funds during the audit. This will destroy the entire family, not just me. My blood turned to ice. What are you talking about? Marcus had just revealed that his sabotage of my wedding was only part of a much larger betrayal. And now I was about to discover that my family was in far more danger than I had ever imagined. The room spun around me as Marcus's words sank in. What do you mean, embezzled money? Marcus slumped back onto the couch, the fight going out of him completely. I've been taking money from the company for the past 8 months. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. I've been gambling on cryptocurrency investments, trying to build up enough capital to start my own competing business. How much money, Marcus? About $200,000 so far. I felt like I might vomit. $200,000 was a significant amount, even for our family's successful company. It was enough to trigger a federal investigation, enough to destroy our father's reputation and potentially send Marcus to prison. Marcus, cryptocurrency gambling? Are you insane? I thought I could make enough money to pay it back before anyone noticed. I had inside information about some blockchain startups. I was so close to breaking even, Wade. Just a few more months, and I could have returned every penny. The delusion in his voice was terrifying. Marcus, gambling with stolen money isn't an investment strategy. It's a crime. I know that now, but when I started losing money instead of making it, I panicked. I realized I needed more time to recover the funds, so I decided to keep you focused on work instead of getting married and potentially discovering the financial irregularities during your normal business oversight. The pieces were falling into place, painting a picture of my brother that I never could have imagined. So, sabotaging my wedding wasn't just about keeping me single. It was about preventing me from looking too closely at the company finances. Marcus nodded miserably. Your wedding would have meant you'd be distracted for months with honeymoon planning and settling into married life. But it also meant you'd eventually want to understand our financial position better, especially if you and Sarah started thinking about buying a house or having kids. I couldn't risk you discovering the missing money. I was beginning to understand the full scope of his deception. Marcus, how were you planning to cover up $200,000 in missing funds indefinitely? I wasn't. I was planning to recover the money through cryptocurrency gains, return it to the company accounts, and no one would ever know. But the market moved against me, and I kept losing more money trying to recover my initial losses. And when cryptocurrency gambling didn't work out, you decided to frame Sarah and manipulate our parents instead of just confessing your mistakes. Marcus looked up at me with desperate eyes. Wade, I know how this sounds, but I was trying to protect the family. If Dad discovers the embezzlement, it won't just destroy me. The company could face criminal charges for inadequate financial oversight. Our family's reputation will be ruined. Mom and Dad could lose their business and their retirement savings. The manipulation in his voice was breathtaking. Even now, caught in multiple lies and facing the consequences of his actions, Marcus was trying to position himself as the victim protecting our family. Marcus, you created this problem. You stole money, gambled it away, and then sabotaged my wedding to cover up your crimes. You don't get to claim you were protecting anyone, but I'm trying to fix it now. Wade, I need your help. If you report me to Dad or the authorities, it destroys everything. But if you give me 6 more months, I think I can recover enough money to make the accounts whole. I looked at my brother with complete incredulity. You want me to help you cover up embezzlement and continue gambling with stolen money? I want you to give me a chance to make this right, without destroying our entire family. That's when I remembered something crucial about my relationship with our family business. Something Marcus had apparently forgotten in his desperation to manipulate me. Marcus, there's something you don't know about my position in the company. He looked confused. What do you mean? I walked to my desk and retrieved a folder of legal documents I had been meaning to review for months. Remember when Grandma Eleanor died 6 months ago? Of course. Why? Her will included some specific provisions about our family business that I haven't had time to fully investigate. But yesterday, when Dad threatened legal action over the wedding funds, I called Eleanor's estate lawyer to understand my legal options. I opened the folder and found the document I was looking for. Grandma Eleanor left me voting control of a trust that owns 30% of Morrison Tech Solutions. She also included specific legal protections designed to prevent family members from using business assets to control my personal decisions. Marcus's face went completely white. What does that mean? It means I have significant legal power over the company's operations. Any major business decisions require unanimous family consent, which means I can effectively block company operations if necessary. More importantly, Eleanor's will specifically grants me the authority to demand full financial audits if I suspect any irregularities. The implications were sinking in for Marcus. Wade, you can't seriously be thinking about auditing the company. That would expose everything. Marcus, The audit is going to happen whether I demand it or not. $200,000 in missing funds doesn't stay hidden forever. Dad is too smart and too careful about finances. He'll discover your theft within months, maybe weeks. Marcus stood up abruptly and began pacing again. Wade, please. I'm begging you. Give me a chance to fix this before you trigger an audit. I'm your brother. You're my brother who has been lying to me for 8 months, stealing from our family's business, and sabotaging the most important relationship in my life. Being related to me doesn't give you the right to destroy everything I care about. What do you want me to do? For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had some control over the situation. First, you're going to call Mom, Dad, and Sarah right now and confess everything. The fake evidence, the private investigator, the real reasons you sabotaged my wedding. Everything. Marcus shook his head frantically. Wade, if I confess to sabotaging your wedding, they'll start asking questions about why I did it. That leads directly to the embezzlement discovery. Then you're going to confess that too. I can't. It will destroy the family. I looked at my brother with a mixture of sadness and determination. Marcus, the family is already destroyed. You destroyed it when you decided to steal money and manipulate all of us. The only question now is whether we're going to deal with the truth honestly or let your lies continue to poison everything we care about. Marcus collapsed back onto the couch, his head in his hands. Wade, there has to be another way. There is no other way. You created this situation, and now you have to face the consequences. But as I watched my brother's complete breakdown, I realized that the confrontation with our parents was going to be even more devastating than I had anticipated. Because Marcus wasn't the only one who would be forced to confront uncomfortable truths about their behavior. Our parents were about to discover that their protective instincts and controlling tendencies had made them easy targets for manipulation. And the most difficult conversation of all would be with Sarah, who would have to process not only the betrayal by my brother, but the realization that my family's dysfunction had nearly destroyed our relationship before it could even begin. The 42 hours my parents had given me were almost up. But instead of them calling their lawyer, I was about to call a family meeting that would change all of our lives forever. I gave Marcus 30 minutes to compose himself before demanding he call our parents and request an emergency family meeting. He tried several more times to negotiate some kind of alternative arrangement, but I remained firm. The truth was coming out today, regardless of the consequences. Our parents agreed to meet at their house that evening. Marcus looked like he might vomit during the entire drive over, while I felt strangely calm. The truth was about to set us all free, even if the immediate aftermath would be painful. Sarah met us at my parents' house, looking nervous but determined. I had told her that Marcus had important information about the private investigator's report, but hadn't revealed the full scope of his confession. She deserved to hear the truth directly from Marcus, not filtered through my explanation. We gathered in my parents' formal living room, the same room where they had offered to fund our wedding 6 months earlier. My father sat in his usual chair, still wearing a business suit despite the late hour. My mother perched on the edge of the sofa, her expression guarded but curious. Sarah sat beside me on the love seat, her hand finding mine for support. Marcus stood near the fireplace, looking like a defendant about to deliver his own guilty verdict. Marcus, you said you had important information about the investigation into Sarah, my father began. We're listening. Marcus glanced at me, and I nodded encouragingly. This was his confession to make. Dad, Mom, Sarah, Wade. I have something to confess that's going to be very difficult to hear. My mother leaned forward. What kind of confession? Marcus took a shaky breath. The private investigator's report about Sarah was fabricated. I hired him to provide cover while I created fake evidence designed to convince you that Sarah was marrying Wade for money. The silence in the room was deafening. Sarah's hand tightened around mine, and I could feel her starting to tremble. My father spoke first, his voice dangerously quiet. What do you mean, you created fake evidence? I used photo editing software to create fake screenshots of text conversations and internet searches. I made it look like Sarah had been researching our family's wealth and contacting Wade's ex-girlfriend. None of it was real. Sarah made a small sound, like she'd been punched in the stomach. My mother's face went completely white. "Marcus," my father said, standing up slowly, "are you telling us that you deliberately deceived us about Sarah's character?" "Yes," my mother found her voice. "But why? Why would you do something so horrible?" Marcus began explaining his fears about me leaving the business after marriage, his concerns about divided loyalty, his belief that marriage would make me less focused on work. With every word, he sounded more delusional and selfish. My parents' expressions progressed from confusion to disbelief to horror. Sarah suddenly stood up and walked to the window, her back to the room. I could see her shoulders shaking, and I realized she was crying silently. "Sarah," my mother said gently, "I am so deeply sorry. We should have trusted our instincts about you instead of believing investigation results." Sarah turned around, and her face was streaked with tears. "Mrs. Morrison, for the past 3 days I've been questioning everything about myself. I kept wondering if I had somehow given you the impression that I cared about Wade's money. I've been going crazy trying to figure out what I did wrong." My father's voice was filled with rage when he addressed Marcus. "You put this innocent young woman through psychological torture based on completely fabricated evidence. You manipulated your mother and me into nearly destroying Wade's happiness. Marcus, this is unconscionable." But Marcus wasn't finished with his confession. The worst part was still coming. "Dad, there's something else. Something that explains why I was so desperate to keep Wade focused on the business instead of getting married." My father's expression suggested he was bracing for more bad news. "What else?" Marcus's voice became almost inaudible. "I've been embezzling money from the company for the past 8 months. About $200,000 total. I was gambling with it in cryptocurrency markets, trying to build capital for my own business venture. When I started losing money instead of making it, I realized I needed to prevent Wade from discovering the financial irregularities." The confession hit my parents like a physical blow. My mother gasped and covered her mouth with her hand. My father sank back into his chair, his face cycling through shock, anger, and devastation. $200,000? My father whispered. "I was trying to pay it back before anyone discovered it. I thought if I could keep Wade distracted with work instead of marriage, I would have more time to recover the money through successful trades." My father's voice was barely controlled. "Marcus, you stole $200,000 from our family business and then sabotaged your brother's wedding to cover up your theft. I know how it sounds, but I was trying to protect the family from the scandal if the embezzlement was discovered." "You were protecting yourself," my mother shouted, her composure finally breaking. "You were willing to destroy Wade and Sarah's relationship to save your own skin." Sarah had been listening to this exchange with growing horror. She suddenly spoke up, her voice shaky but clear. "Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, I need to ask you something directly. Did you really believe I was capable of the things Marcus accused me of? Did you really think I was manipulating Wade for money?" "He did." My parents exchanged a guilty look. My mother spoke first. "Sarah, we've been overprotective of both our boys their entire lives. We've seen too many wealthy families torn apart by people who were attracted to money rather than genuine love. When we saw what appeared to be evidence of deception, our worst fears seemed confirmed." My father nodded. "We should have trusted our personal experience with you instead of believing investigation results. Sarah, you've been nothing but genuine and kind every time we've spent time together. We allowed our paranoia to override our better judgment, but it was more than that," Sarah said quietly. "You were willing to destroy Wade's happiness rather than risk being wrong about me. You valued protecting your money more than trusting your son's judgment about the woman he chose to marry." The observation was devastating because it was completely accurate. My parents had been so focused on preventing financial manipulation that they had nearly perpetrated emotional manipulation themselves. My father cleared his throat. "Sarah, you're absolutely right. We owe you and Wade a profound apology. Our behavior was controlling and destructive, regardless of Marcus's deception." Marcus, who had been standing silently during this exchange, suddenly spoke up again. There's one more thing I need to confess. This isn't the first time I've interfered with Wade's relationships. I've been subtly sabotaging his dating life for years, finding reasons to criticize his girlfriends, or creating situations that would cause conflict. I wanted to keep him single and focused on business. The revelation was like a final devastating blow. I thought back over my dating history, remembering relationships that had ended mysteriously or girlfriends who had suddenly become distant after spending time with my family. Marcus had been systematically sabotaging my personal happiness for years. "Marcus," I said quietly, "how many relationships did you destroy?" "3 serious ones before Sarah. But Sarah was different. You were talking about marriage, about building a life together." I realized she was a permanent threat to our business partnership. Sarah looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Wade, I'm so sorry. I had no idea your family was this dysfunctional. I would never have put you in a position of having to choose between me and them if I had known." "Sarah, you didn't do anything wrong. You couldn't have known that my brother was sabotaging my relationships, or that my parents were susceptible to manipulation about money." My father stood up and walked to Marcus. "Son, what you've done is criminal. Embezzlement is a felony. Fraud is a felony. You've committed serious crimes against this family and this business." Marcus broke down completely, sobbing as he tried to apologize to everyone in the room. But his tears felt manipulative rather than genuine, like a final attempt to avoid consequences rather than true remorse for his actions. That's when I realized the most important conversation was still ahead of us. We had to decide how to move forward as a family, how to rebuild trust that had been shattered, and how to ensure that this kind of manipulation could never happen again. The 42 hours were nearly up, but instead of my parents calling their lawyer to sue me, we were about to call lawyers to figure out how to handle Marcus's crimes while protecting what remained of our family. The hours that followed Marcus's confession were among the most difficult in our family's history. My parents had to confront not only their son's betrayal and criminal behavior, but also their own role in creating a family dynamic that had enabled his manipulation. My father immediately called the family's attorney to discuss the legal implications of Marcus's embezzlement. The lawyer explained that while $200,000 was indeed a felony amount, families did have options for handling theft by relatives without necessarily involving criminal prosecution, depending on Marcus's willingness to make restitution and accept consequences. More importantly, my parents had to face the uncomfortable truth that their controlling, overprotective behavior had made them easy targets for Marcus's deception. They realized that their attempts to shield me from potential harm had nearly caused the exact kind of damage they were trying to prevent. My mother pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation that evening, apologizing with tears in her eyes for the trauma she had endured. "Sarah, I know words can't undo what we put you through, but please understand that we acted out of misguided love for Wade, not malice toward you." Sarah, with the grace that had made me fall in love with her in the first place, accepted the apology, while also setting clear boundaries. "Mrs. Morrison, I can forgive what happened, but Wade and I need to know that this kind of interference in our relationship will never happen again. We're building a marriage, and that requires trust and respect from our families." My father took responsibility for restoring the wedding funds immediately, along with additional compensation for the emotional distress caused by the false accusations. But more importantly, he began attending counseling with my mother to address the controlling tendencies that had made them vulnerable to manipulation. The legal resolution took several weeks to finalize. Marcus agreed to full restitution of the embezzled funds, plus interest, in exchange for avoiding criminal prosecution. He was immediately terminated from the family business and required to enter therapy to address his destructive jealousy and gambling behavior. The family attorney structured a payment plan that would allow Marcus to repay the stolen money over 3 years while rebuilding his life independently. Perhaps most significantly, Marcus had to write detailed apology letters to Sarah, my parents, and me, acknowledging the specific harms caused by his actions and taking full responsibility for his choices. Reading his letter to Sarah, in which he admitted to deliberately trying to destroy her relationship with me out of selfish motives, was both heartbreaking and liberating. Our wedding did proceed as planned, but with significant changes that reflected our newfound independence and the lessons learned from our crisis. Instead of the elaborate Napa Valley celebration funded by my parents' guilt and control, Sarah and I chose a more intimate ceremony that reflected our actual values and priorities. Using my inheritance from grandmother Eleanor, we planned a beautiful outdoor wedding at a botanical garden, surrounded by 100 of our closest friends and family members. The celebration was elegant but unpretentious, focused on the joy of our commitment rather than impressing guests with expensive details. My parents attended the wedding with genuine happiness, finally seeing Sarah as the loving, authentic person she had always been. They gave a toast acknowledging their mistakes and welcoming Sarah into the family with the respect she deserved. My mother later told me that watching Sarah's forgiveness and grace throughout the crisis had taught her important lessons about judging character based on actions rather than fears. Marcus did not attend the wedding, which was the right decision for everyone involved. He was beginning his own journey of rehabilitation, working with therapists to understand the roots of his jealousy and possessiveness. We maintained minimal contact while he focused on making restitution and rebuilding his life independently. The experience taught our entire family crucial lessons about healthy relationships and boundaries. My parents learned that protecting their children required trusting them to make good decisions rather than trying to control their choices. They began treating me as an independent adult rather than someone who needed their guidance and approval for major life decisions. Sarah and I learned that building a strong marriage requires clear boundaries with extended family and the courage to stand up for each other when those boundaries are tested. We also learned that forgiveness doesn't mean accepting harmful behavior, but rather choosing to move forward without carrying resentment. Most importantly, I learned that true family love requires honesty, trust, and respect for each other's autonomy. The inheritance from my grandmother Eleanor wasn't just money and business shares. It was wisdom about protecting my independence and the courage to fight for my own happiness when necessary. Our marriage began with a foundation of mutual support and hard-won independence. Sarah and I had proven to ourselves and our families that we could weather serious challenges together, that our love was strong enough to survive manipulation and betrayal from people we trusted. 6 months after our wedding, Marcus completed his therapy program and wrote me a final letter requesting a chance to rebuild our relationship. He acknowledged that his actions had been driven by selfishness and jealousy, not love or concern for the family. More importantly, he recognized that healthy relationships require supporting each other's happiness rather than trying to control it. I agreed to begin the slow process of rebuilding our brotherhood, with clear boundaries and the understanding that trust would have to be earned over time. Sarah supported this decision, recognizing that healing our family relationships was important for our long-term happiness. Today, 2 years after our wedding crisis, our family has found a new equilibrium based on honesty and respect rather than control and manipulation. My parents have become genuinely supportive grandparents in waiting, excited about the family. Sarah and I are building together. Marcus has successfully repaid the embezzled money and built a career independent of our family business, finally learning to find fulfillment in his own achievements rather than sabotaging others. The life lesson that emerged from this painful experience is profound. Authentic love requires the courage to trust the people we care about to make their own decisions, even when those decisions involve some risk. My parents' attempts to protect me from potential harm nearly caused the exact kind of damage they feared. Marcus's attempts to control my choices led to the destruction of our brotherhood and his own downfall. True family strength comes not from controlling each other, but from supporting each other's authentic choices and standing together when those choices are challenged. Sarah and I learned that building a marriage worth fighting for sometimes means literally fighting for it against people who claim to love us but try to manipulate us. Our wedding day, when it finally arrived, was beautiful not because of the flowers or the venue or the elegant dinner, but because it represented a triumph over fear, manipulation, and control. We celebrated not just our love for each other, but our courage to defend that love against anyone who tried to undermine it. The most meaningful moment came during our first dance, when Sarah whispered in my ear, "We did it, Wade. We built something real that nobody can take away from us." She was right. We had built a marriage based on mutual respect, trust, and the hard-won wisdom that comes from surviving serious challenges together. As I think back on those 42 terrifying hours when everything seemed to be falling apart, I'm grateful for the crisis that revealed the true character of everyone in our lives. We learned who we could trust, who we needed to set boundaries with, and most importantly, that our love was strong enough to weather whatever storms might come our way. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting someone you love? Sometimes the people closest to us can cause the most damage when they try to control our choices out of fear or jealousy. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about how to balance family relationships with personal independence. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and consider subscribing for more real-life stories about family, relationships, and finding the courage to fight for what matters most. Share this with anyone who might need to hear that it's okay to set boundaries with family members who try to manipulate or control their decisions. Thank you for listening to our story, and I hope it encourages you to trust your own judgment and fight for the relationships that bring genuine joy and love into your life.